welcome back to the Transmissions Draft League, season number 4. We are in the final week of the season, and boy, I really can't believe it. This season has, at the same time, gone really fast and also feels like it's slowed to a crawl at times, but we finally made it to the final week of the season, and this is where legends are made. Of course, the unfortunate truth is that technically this game is pretty inconsequential, at least in terms of seeding. We're going up against the number 1 team in our division, the Season 4 Sweepers, who are currently undefeated 6-0. We currently hold a record of 4-2. A couple of slip-ups earlier in the season, but I think we can definitely bounce back. And definitely we have a good matchup here. Now, what do I mean by this not having implications for seeding? Well, because the Sweepers are 2 games ahead of us, winning here actually won't allow us to overtake them in the standings, so the best we can do is second place in the seeding. And with that being said, even if we lose really badly here, we are more than a game ahead of all of the teams behind us, meaning that even losing here does not get us any lower than the 2 seed. So no matter what, our opponent is guaranteed the 1 seed and we are guaranteed the 2 seed. But that being said, I do think that this is important for other reasons. This match has a lot of meaning in terms of what I would like to call momentum here. We have had a pretty big turnaround in the second half of the season. We've gone 3 games in a row where we win 2-0. And a couple of those games were definitely more, or should have been more competitive matches that we ended up dominating just because our team is that strong. And I think it would be a statement win to go out in week 7 and say, hey, those 3 weeks previous were not a flash in the pan. The Bewares are here to stay, and if we can be the only team to beat the undefeated team this season, that is a huge statement and gives us a lot of momentum heading into the playoffs. So hopefully we can end up doing that, but today we are going to team build for that match. There is a lot of things to like about this. There's a lot of things to be worried about. Of course, you can't be an undefeated team without having a pretty good team and a pretty good coach, so that is what we're going to be taking a look at. Of course, since this is a bit of a guide video, I'm going to walk you through my thought process here and allow you to kind of hopefully take some notes on what you can do for your own draft building in the future. That being said, the stuff that I want to have is, of course, my team builder over here on my right. I've also got a document that has both of the teams, both our team and our opponent's team, as well as a damage calculator ready to go. So as a quick refresher, your Manchester Bewares are Ndidi Female, Iron Crown, Talonflame, Hariyama, Ogrepon Cornerstone, Grafii, Squawkabilly, Rianclis, Alcremay, and Rampardos. The team we are going up against, the Season 4 Sweepers, have got Archaludon, Sinistra, Iron Hands, Klefki, Basculegion Female, Tornadis, Therian, Greninja, Frostmoth, Raichu Alola, and Braviary. So obviously a really strong team here. The one thing I will say is very similar to the Draco Meteors here. We can kind of ignore at least half of this team in that, 1, they have pretty bad matchups into us, and 2, even when those Pokemon do show up, the natural strength of especially our highest tier Pokemons kind of just invalidate them a lot. I'm looking specifically at Pokemon like Greninja, Frostmoth, and Braviary. Even if we give Braviary a Defiant boost, it is not bulky enough to survive our Pokemon's attacks, and it's also not fast enough to really threaten any of our Pokemon before it can be knocked out. So unfortunately, it just doesn't get to make use of the ability Defiant. That being said, it also needs the Defiant boost in order to threaten big damage on a lot of our most important Pokemon, which does leave it in a very awkward position. Raichu can be a little bit more threatening, as it does get Fake Out and of course can use Expanding Force against us, but as we saw with another one of our opponents who has a much stronger Expanding Force Pokemon in Braviary Sui, that doesn't always work well against our team. We're built around Psychic Terrain, so we have got superior Psychic types, which just means that Raichu's not going to be able to break through anything. Plus, we have some anti-spread move tech with Wide Guard Hariyama. And then also Greninja and Frostmoth. Although Greninja is a dark type, is pretty frail and just doesn't threaten big enough damage on anything aside from like Iron Crown with Dark Pulse. And even that I'm not convinced is good enough, especially considering that Iron Crown is probably going to be our Terra Pokemon this week. Tornadus T could be a little bit more threatening as that Pokemon's a really fast tailwind setter, but even then, not super threatened by it in terms of like how much damage it can deal. It's more going to be a support Pokemon, and obviously I do feel that we have better support on the team, so that's something to keep in mind there. The Pokemon we do need to watch out for are, of course, those top 6 Pokemon, in my opinion. And I am including Tornadus T in that. And I kind of expect our opponent to bring all those top 6, maybe leaving one of them behind for like a Raichu Alola in order to kind of say, if you don't bring Psychic Terrain, I have really strong fake outs to mess with you. That being said, I think we have a decent matchup, and of course, all of that starts with, in my opinion, the best Pokemon that is going to work the best in this matchup, and that's going to be Iron Crown. Iron Crown is almost always the best Pokemon in every matchup, but in this matchup specifically, it threatens a ton of damage on every Pokemon, and is not super threatened by anything, if I'm being honest. Iron Crown just has the stats to be able to say, I'm faster than everything you got, I'm bulkier than everything you got, and I hit just hard enough to threaten everything you got. Now, of course, the only thing that we have to be worried about is Basculegion F. That Pokemon does have Dark-type moves, Ghost-type moves that can really threaten us, and I guess to a certain extent Sinistra as well. But of course, we have a normal type with redirection moves that can't be ignored, which just means that our opponent is going to be hitting their face into a wall if they decide to deal with Iron Crown that way offensively. Defensively speaking, only one Pokemon can have the Assault Vest, and only one Pokemon can be Terra Fighting or Terra Steel. And I'm not too worried about that. So we're going to go ahead and get into the Iron Crown set. It's going to be very, very standard. You will have seen something similar before, but we got a little bit of tech here. So of course we are going to be Booster Energy, and the moves we are going to bring is going to be very standard. Protect, Tachyon Cutter, Expanding Force, and of course Terra Blast. Now, the stats are going to be a little bit more interesting. We are just going to look to outspeed a max speed Archaludon. I do think that 616 is one of the coaches that is just crazy enough to bring a really fast Archaludon in order to try and catch me out. I like to play it safe and just say that I'm going to outspeed Archaludon no matter what. Max speed Archaludon does get to 150, so we're going to be 151. And then we want a booster special, so let's go ahead and max out our special attack. Now this leaves us with just enough EVs to be able to bulk out a little bit. Let's make sure that we are a multiple of 16 and give ourselves a little bit of extra special defense and defense investment. So the main idea with this is, of course, to outspeed a majority of our opponent's team. The only things we can't outspeed are Scarf Pokemon and Tornadus T. Of course, discounting the Pokemon that we are disrespecting, such as Greninja and Raichu, which we can't outspeed anyways. That being said, Tachyon Cutter Expanding Force hits just about everything on our opponent's team. Unfortunately for our opponent, a couple of the Steel types on our opponent's team don't have a great matchup in Iron Crown. Klefki doesn't, because actually Tachyon Cutter is neutral, so a Helping Hand Tachyon Cutter does manage to actually take Klefki out. And then the Archaludon has actually really frail special defense, so that Pokemon's going to require the Assault Vest really to be able to go toe-to-toe with Iron Crown. And even then, if we get really good chip damage on that Pokemon, that is enough out of Iron Crown, so I'm not too worried about that. That being said, we do want to have one more way of really threatening that Pokemon, and that is through our Terra type, which this week is actually going to be Terra Fighting. Terra Fighting is really difficult for our opponent to punish. Of course, they do have some relatively weak spread moves, such as Dazzling Gleam and the Bleak Windstorm on Tornadus. Of course, neither of those are super weak, but they are resisted by Iron Crown before the Terra. And Iron Crown's only really forced to Terra as an offensive measure, as our opponent, like I said, doesn't have enough offensive pressure in order to really threaten Iron Crown besides at Basket Legion, which kind of allows us to play a really offensive game where we can just lead Iron Crown, break a ton of holes open, use our Terra Fighting when we need to break through something like Archaludon, and then win the game from there. As long as our opponent doesn't have speed control and or doesn't have terrain control, we are looking pretty. One thing I do want to call out, though, of course, is that Klefki does learn Misty Terrain, which is something that our opponent can use to overwrite our terrains. So we are going to be addressing that with our next Pokemon, which is, of course, going to be in DDF. This Pokemon is obviously our best Pokemon for the matchup, and does basically everything. So what we are going to do is, of course, we're going to be Psychic Seed. This allows Indeedee to really take special hits super duper well, and allows us to kind of ignore our special defense in terms of bulking ourselves out, and it allows us to be a really annoying Pokemon for our opponent to deal with. So as I said, we do want to have Follow Me, as our opponent does have a couple of ghost types that can threaten Iron Crown, but with Follow Me and being a normal type, we can completely ignore those Pokemon. Now, on top of Follow Me, we also want to have Helping Hand. As I did mention, Helping Hand does make a lot of those Iron Crown calcs look unbeatable. Helping Hand, Tachyon Cutter, does manage to take out a Klefki most of the time, as long as it doesn't have a ton of special defense investment. And even if it does, a Helping Hand Tachyon Cutter into Expanding Force does take it out, or an Expanding Force into a Tachyon Cutter does take it out. The other thing we can definitely look into is a coverage move on Indeedee in order to get that last little bit of Klefki health. But the last thing that I want to do is I want to be able to have a way to reset up our own Psychic Terrain if our opponent does manage to bring that tech on Klefki. So for that, we have a couple of options. We can either be Skill Swap, which does allow us to take the Prankster ability away from Klefki, making it so that it can no longer spam those support moves with priority, and it forces Klefki to actually set up the Psychic Terrain for us. Now, unfortunately, there's nothing really that Indeedee can do with the Prankster ability in order to really mess with our opponent. But of course, I do want to be able to set that back up. The other option is, of course, just manual Psychic Terrain. While I do think that that is completely fine, I do still want to have a way of really being able to threaten that Pokemon by pretty much neutering it, and so that's why we're going to go with Skill Swap here. It does allow us to take our opponent's Prankster away and reset up our terrain. The other thing that it allows us to do is in situations where we're going up against something like Basket Legion, or we're going up against something like Archaludon, we can take those Pokemon's ability away from them. So something like Stalwart on Archaludon in order to ignore Follow Me, taking that away does allow us to now redirect that Pokemon's attacks now, as well as Basket Legion F, if it is either Adaptability or Swift Swim, being without its ability does pretty effectively neuter that Pokemon, allowing us to really win the damage trade. Now, this last move, of course, we do want to be able to deal damage with. I'm going to go ahead and run Psychic. It's boosted by our own Psychic Terrain, and our opponent only has one natural Dark type, which I don't think is coming to the match. Even if it does, I'm not too worried about it. And of course, even if our opponent does choose to bring Terra Dark or Terra Steel, we have a Terra Fighting Iron Crown, which can certainly punish that. So that is something to look forward to there. Now we're going to bulk out our Indeedee as much as possible. Like I said, our opponent does have mainly special attackers that we are worried about at least, but I am going to bulk out here physically, mostly because our opponent does have an Iron Hands that with a Drain Punch does do a healthy amount of damage if we bring up Hands here versus an Indeedee, making sure that we are the bulky set. Drain Punch without the physical investment does do roughly 60% to us, which means that it is a 2-hit KO. However, with max physical defense investment, we end up living 2 drain punches really easily, and with a psychic, we are able to hit an Assault Vest Iron Hands for a near 2-hit knockout. If it's not the Assault Vest version, we easily 2-hit KO that Pokemon without special attack investment. And like I said, I do believe that the Archaludon is going to require the Assault Vest this time around, because if it doesn't have it, we can just muscle through it with Iron Crown really easily. So I expect the Iron Hands to be without its Assault Vest for this match, meaning that it's going to be Iron Crown and Indeedee food for sure. But let's go ahead and give ourselves the bold nature and give ourselves just a little bit of extra special defense investment. What this allows us to do is, it doesn't really change any calc specifically, but say a Pokemon like Assault Vest Archaludon, having that tiny bit extra special defense investment does mean that Draco Meteor is now guaranteed to not 2-hit KO us, and we actually live a +1 Draco Meteor really easily. +2 Draco Meteor gets a little bit closer to knocking us out, but doesn't quite get the job done, meaning that Indeedee, basically no matter the circumstance, is going to be able to redirect at least 1 attack away from our opponent, and is really effective at allowing Iron Crowns to have extra turns of doing damage. Next up has been our best Pokemon of the season so far, and that's going to be Hariyama. Hariyama is, of course, really good into basically every matchup, but we are wanting to bring it here as our pseudo backup offense. I like to think of this as a sort of Pokemon that is going to be really good at dealing damage to our opponent's team in the case that Iron Crown does go down. Now, we aren't packing Trick Room on our Indeedee, so what we do want to do is run a little bit of speed investment in order to outspeed certain Pokemon. I'm looking at a Pokemon like Sinistcha, which generally doesn't run any speed investment, so if we can make it to 91, that would be super great. So let's go ahead and see if we can make it. We do make it to 91 pretty easily, and then of course we are going to run Adamant here as well. And then our opponent does have a very special attack heavy team, as I mentioned, so we are going to run that high special defense. Now, looking at our abilities here, all of them are pretty solid. Thick Fat is not important in this matchup because our opponent doesn't have any important ice or fire type attacks, so Thick Fat is not what we're going to run here. Guts obviously is our best ability for dealing damage, which I think is what we're going to want to do with Hariyama. And then Sheer Force is not bad if we also want to be able to run an item aside from the Flame Orb, so that we're not dealing damage to ourselves, or if we want Hariyama to be able to go even faster with something like a Choice Scarf. I am actually going to pick the Guts here. This allows us to run the Flame Orb, as I said, and allows us to get some really good damage down. Let's go ahead and run Protect here, of course, to make sure that we can get our Flame Orb boost for free. And then from here we have a couple of options here. Of course, we are going to run our Close Combat. It is our strongest fighting type attack, and it hurts just about everything on our opponent's team. It definitely KOs a Archaludon thanks to the burn. We can also look at something like Iron Hands, where even if it's the bulky set, Close Combat is still doing roughly 70% to that Pokemon. So honestly, ground type coverage is optional. And we can even look at a Pokemon like Klefki, who generally is pretty frail, and it does have a good chance to actually knock out that Pokemon in one hit, assuming no Intimidates or the Reflect. And then finally, of course, we do want to look at a Pokemon like Sinistcha and Basculegion. Of course, Close Combat's not going to be able to hit those Pokemon, but another move that is able to is, of course, Knock Off, a move that I know is going to do a ton of damage to both Sinistcha. It looks like it has a very minuscule chance to knock out Sinistcha, and Basculegion, I'm almost guaranteeing it does in fact guarantee knock out that Pokemon. So really nice to have there. Now the last move is definitely up for debate. I think Close Combat Knockoff covers almost all of our bases. So what we can do here is we can run Wide Guard. I think that that's kind of an awesome shout considering that our opponent, although not relying on these spread attacks, does have quite a few of them. We have Machagacha on Sinistra, we have Dazzling Gleam on Klefki, we have Muddy Water on Basculegion, we have Bleak Windstorm on Tornadus, we have Icy Wind from things like Frostmoth, we have Expanding Force from Raichu. A lot of those moves, although not integral to our opponent's strategy, are annoying for us to handle, so that's why I would like to run Wide Guard. Now this is just a personal preference here, but I am going to actually reorder these. We're going to put Wide Guard second here so that we have all of our non-damaging moves up front, so that we have all of our options kind of organized here. I also like to put Protect when I do run it as the first move in the slot. I've mentioned this a couple of times in videos, but when it comes to actual competitive play, you want to be able to have Protect in that first slot just in case you run out of time. Basically, when you're on a timer, Pokemon just selects whatever move is in that first slot, and if you run out of time, you're still wanting to think about it. Protect does unironically give you extra time to think about things, allowing you to make a better, more informed decision later on. Now, that being said, our Terra type is going to be interesting here. There are quite a few options that we can run with. The ones that come to mind are of course Terra Dark. This allows us to kind of 1v1 a Basculegion F, even when they are running a move like Last Respects and they are trying to sweep the game here. Now they even naturally can't knock out Hariyama with that, but with the Terra Dark, they can't even 2-hit KO Hariyama, and they would need a rain boosted Hydro Pump in order to do so, which is something that hopefully we will have answers for, right? So I think that we are probably going to run Terra Dark. Another thing to consider is a Terra type that helps us with the Archaludon. If, for example, they are spamming the Electro Shot. So if we bring up Arch here, naturally, Hariyama actually does pretty well into this Pokemon, aside from Draco Meteor and Electro Shot. We do live both of those attacks. Once they get to +1, Draco Meteor does get closer to knocking us out, and +2 does guarantee the job gets done. So instead, I think I'd like to just keep the Terra Dark. It helps us with the niche matchups that we don't naturally deal with super well. And with the Terra Dark, Knockoff actually is doing respectable damage even to things that it's not super effective against. So I think that Terra Dark's actually a huge shout. The other thing that this does is that in specific scenarios where Psychic Terrain isn't up, we can actually ignore Klefki's Prankster moves, which allows us to, for example, like I just mentioned, live something like a Electro Shot and or a Draco Meteor, because Klefki is not able to lower our special defense with the Metal Sound. So something to keep in mind there. Alright, next Pokemon up is going to be yet another unsung hero of our team, and that's going to be Squawkabilly. I think that this Pokemon is unironically one of the best Pokemon in this matchup. Like I said, we are super disrespecting Braviary with this pick, but I think that honestly, Squawkabilly is really awesome in this matchup. The big thing that it does do is it has excellent coverage for a lot of Pokemon and has great application for a lot of things. So obviously I want to be running the Choice Scarf Intimidate set. This allows us to outspeed a lot of our opponent's Pokemon by surprise, and landing an Intimidate on a Pokemon like Iron Hands basically turns it into a nothing burger, especially because it doesn't have damage boosting options like Hariyama does. And on top of that, we do have a really awesome Final Gambit here. Final Gambit's actually way better in this matchup than in previous matchups because our opponent has multiple Pokemon that actually drop to this. Namely, I'm looking at Klefki. Now, I know that it's a lot of honing in on Klefki, but I believe that it's going to be the most disruptive Pokemon in this matchup. And for that reason, I think that it's probably our worst matchup. The other thing we want to run, of course, is Brave Bird. Brave Bird is our strongest flying type attack, and it hurts Sinistra a lot. It also does decent damage into Iron Hands, and in scenarios where we go up against something like a Basculegion, we outspeed a Scarf adaptability Basculegion, allowing us to really catch that Pokemon out, dealing a little bit of extra damage. I doubt that we'll be able to knock it out in one hit, but we're not trying to. The next thing that I want to run is, of course, Parting Shot. If you remember our Week 4 match versus the Bit Breakers, our Week 5 matchup, this was an MVP move there, allowing us to really slow things down like Ursaluna and like the Crawdon, making a lot of things super manageable. And the lowering of special attack is actually huge for a Pokemon like Archaludon, which again, just like we were talking about with Iron Hands, gets way more manageable at -1 and makes Electroshot a lot less scary because it does get its special attack dropped. Now the final move here can be just about anything. I like the Shout of Tailwind as it allows us to match Tailwinds with the Tornadus. And I believe that a Scarf Squawkabilly can actually outspeed the Tornadus on our opponent's team. If we take a look at max speed on both of these Pokemon, and then we give a Scarf to our Squawkabilly, we do outspeed that Tornadus, which allows us to click Tailwind before that Pokemon can move, and potentially follow up with something like Iron Crown to be able to knock that Pokemon out. So I think let's go ahead and add Tailwind here. The only other thing to really consider is something like Feather Dance in order to really neuter the opponent's Iron Hands. We could also consider Fake Tears here to be able to combo with our Iron Crown to just drop a Pokemon instantly. But let's go ahead and add Tailwind here, because I do think it is important to show our opponent that we are willing to match Tailwinds here. Now the other thing is that we don't need maximum speed in order to really threaten our opponent's team here. We just need to be able to outspeed a max speed Basculegion. So let's go ahead and pull up Basculegion. And let's give it a timid nature to make sure that it is as fast as can be. And let's give it a choice Scarf. And we just need to hit 215 rather, with our choice Scarf, meaning that we only need Jolly 152. 148. Now that gives us a ton of points that we can invest into our attack, allowing this Brave Bird to actually deal respectable damage, if I'm not too mistaken. Yeah, Brave Bird actually 2-hit knockout on Basculegion if it chooses to ignore us, which it definitely should not, because without the choice specs, it actually can't knock us out, aside from, like I said, a rain boosted Hydro Pump. Even Ice Beam is failing to claim a knockout there, so awesome news for us. And then of course the Sinistra is not going to like seeing that either. If we look at Trick Room support there, Brave Bird is doing upwards of 85%, which is devastating for a Pokemon that wants to be able to sit on the field and stick around for a long time. So awesome news for Squawkabilly there. The next step that I want to bring to this match is probably the Ogerpon. Ogerpon does threaten a lot of the lower tier Pokemon on our opponent's team, and just in general is a great support Pokemon that also threatens a ton of damage on everything aside from a Pokemon like Archaludon, which hopefully we're going to be forcing into a Terra with our Iron Crown and or Hariyama. So important to note there. Let's go ahead and just make a very standard Ogerpon set here. Let's look at Ivy Cudgel, and let's look at, I think we're going to use Horn Leech here. Horn Leech would basically just be for the water types on our opponent's team, which is, like I said, Basculegion and the Greninja. So if we bring up Cornerstone, no bulk support. Hornleech does grab that knockout pretty easily. And I am almost positive that Greninja also drops to a Hornleech. So let's make a, like I said, really standard Ogerpon set here with very little bulk investment, but is absolutely excellent in the matchup. The next thing to look at is our final Pokemon, which in my opinion could be just about anything. One thing I do want to show my opponent is that I am prepared for his weather, and for that reason I want to bring my own Prankster Weather Setter. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is that this Pokemon does get Switcheroo. So I'm going to go ahead and give this thing an Iron Ball. And what this does is it lowers Grafaii's speed. So if we actually run minimum speed on our Grafaii, this allows us to be able to underspeed the Klefki, allowing it to go first, set up the rain, and then we switch the weather over to sun. And then on top of that, Switcheroo allows us to give something like the Basculegion or another Pokemon the Iron Ball, forcing it to be even slower. And now it is kind of just food for our team. Now, of course, I also want to run something like the Gunk Shot. It is okay in the matchup. Obviously, it doesn't work on the Klefki or the Archaludon, but like I said, we are trying to force a Terra on the Archaludon, so hopefully that is something there. Could also look at running something like the Acid Spray. If I continue looking down here, we could run something like Parting Shot, which we do have on the Squawkabilly, as I said, really good in the matchup. What I'm going to add on to here is actually Encore. I think our opponent could probably lean into Protect quite a bit in this matchup, and being able to force those Pokemon to only Protect is obviously really strong. So let's go ahead and make this thing super duper bulky, and we have a really annoying Pokemon for our opponent to deal with. Of course, we are also going to be Terra Dark on this Pokemon. Do we want to be Terra Dark on this Pokemon? Let's actually go ahead and go with Terra Ghost. This allows us to just dodge fake outs, especially since we don't have Protect ourselves. Terra Dark would be good for something like a Prankster Taunt, which I believe Klefki doesn't even learn Taunt. So instead, we can just smack it really hard with something like the Iron Crown's Tachyon Cutter that we were talking about before. But yeah, this is going to be the team that we are bringing for Week 7. Like I said, I think we have a really strong matchup this week, and we have a lot of answers for Pokemon that our opponent has shown a really good affinity for. So hopefully I will see you in the match. And yeah, good luck to our opponent. Bye-bye.